Political analyst at Control Risks Thomas Favaro is in Sao Paulo, keeping a close watch on events. He joins us now via Skype. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Great to talk to you again. It's a difficult time for the Brazilian president.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it was always a difficult, challenging for any leader in particular. The pandemic, is in many ways unprecedented, but I think there are many ways in which President Jair Bolsonaro has made his situation even more difficult. I think, firstly, by staging a very controversial stance vis-a-vis the pandemic, or trying to downplay the severity of the illness, calling, COVID-19 a little flu, and later attempting to stop the social distancing measures that were implemented across the country. I think those types of measures were very negatively received by large swaths of society, and ultimately led to a significant decline in his approval rating. And most recently, as you pointed out, a new controversy involving the release of official figures around the total number of cases and fatalities in Brazil, also denting the government's credibility and questioning its ability to weather this health storm on Brazil.
Why would he want to play around with statistics of the size of the problem of COVID-19?
So the official stance was that they were trying to separate the deaths that were being reported each day, for the deaths that actually took place during that day, and the deaths that were confirmed that day, but probably that took place, days or even weeks earlier, but only the COVID-19 test was confirmed that particular day. But given the situation that Brazil is in the moment, where there's a lot of concern about the mounting number of cases, there were widespread concerns around civil society that this was potentially could be seen as an attempt of the government to try to downplay the severity of the pandemic and the rising number of cases. So we have seen, reaction from across the political spectrum. We've seen that from the Supreme Court and even civil society as well. We recently saw a consortia of newspapers gathering news outlets and making sure that they were going to gather that information from alternative sources, notably state governments, if the government indeed move ahead with its decision to change the methodology on the daily reporting of new cases and fatalities.
The last time we spoke, you explained very well that Brazil is almost like many continents in one place because it's such a widespread, so many borders that it crosses, more than 200 million people, but the COVID-19 is affecting different parts of the country in different ways. Where you are, Sao Paulo, it's really bad.
Yeah, Sao Paulo has always been the hotspot. I think it's probably the most globally connected city in the country, that's fair to say. And in many ways, it was the first where the contagion began. It was the first place where the contagion began, and it's now where we have consistently reported the highest number of cases. The state and municipal authorities have recently attempted to relax some of the social distancing measures that have been implemented, but I think the preliminary results of that are quite concerning, sense of another spike in the number of cases, and again, renewed concerns whether this was probably or potentially a measure that was a bit too early in its attempt to, again, reignite the economy, which, again, it's a shared concern among many, but there are also health concerns at play here, and it remains to be seen how much of those protocols that have been attempted to be put in place, for example, around public transport, will be truly efficient to avoid a substantial escalation of cases going forward.
So the president has been really keen to try and get the economy restarted as quickly as possible, perhaps going too quickly in terms of the easing of lockdown procedures and some of the restrictions. And I just wonder if the forced republication of these statistics is going to force his hand perhaps to slow down that effort.
So the federal government has initially attempted to block the social distancing measures that were implemented by state and municipal governments, but the Supreme Court has basically put a final stop to that, saying that the local governments actually have the jurisdiction and the authority to implement their social distancing measures. So the federal government in many ways has its hands tied in terms of directly forcing states and municipalities to roll back or relax some of the social distancing measures that have been put in place to date. Is now trying to influence them indirectly, but directly it cannot force any local government to do so. But I do want to caveat that the word lockdown, has a different meaning in South Africa than it has in Brazil, because South Africa did go through, I think, quite a strict lockdown. And in Brazil, except for a handful of metropolitan areas, the vast majority of the country remains on voluntary social distancing measures to date. So there were no mandatory lockdowns enforced the vast majority of the Brazilian territory.
Give us a sense, if you can, of how people are feeling on the ground as they're seeing these statistics mount and Brazil go to second in the list of the most infections in the world.
It's obviously a huge blow to Brazil's credibility in its attempt to, showcase not only a buoyant democracy, but also a strong economy that will be able to weather this, this pandemic. But internally, it also has created or fostered further political polarization, very much centered around the figure of the president, with, I think, in many ways, a growing anti-government support base, so to speak, and also the government struggling to keep on its approval ratings. And you can see that dynamic playing out not only in social media and in public opinion, but also growingly on the street. So we are seeing an uptick, and we do expect that to continue in the upcoming weeks, an uptick in street protests with more and more Brazilians who are, I think, upset with the government's positioning on COVID-19 specifically, to take the streets to voice their anger and their concerns and try to force the government to change trajectory.
And people's behavior, are they wearing masks more and more and being a little bit more safe, or how is this playing out?
Yeah, so the use of masks is actually mandatory in many urban centers, and I think many Brazilians have adopted it. But in terms of actually staying at home, I think we have seen compliance rates for those types of measures really, really, really below optimum. So local health experts have suggested that the best compliance rates possible for staying at home policies would be around 70%, and in most cases it had hovered around 40 to 50% in the best case scenario. So quite far from the expected results, and in many ways, I think it's not a surprise to see, the growing number of cases and fatality as a result of that, that gap between the expected compliance and the actual compliance rates on some of those social distancing measures.
So we know Brazil is famous for its beach culture, carnivals, and I guess that has changed quite a bit.
Yes, I guess many in Brazil are questioning, how soon will the country be able to get back to the mass gatherings that, such as Carnival that you alluded to, that, are in many ways a sort of a part of the cultural backbone of the Brazilian society. In many ways, it seems that this is still far away, certainly for, I think, most of the urban centers where the COVID-19 contagion has been more severe. And with regards to the beach, we have seen also the government, most state governments, actually quite strict on restricting, outdoors activities on beaches, because it's a typical leisure activity for Brazilians, but it does have this potential to ultimately spread the virus.
All right, Thomaz, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for joining us on the program tonight.